Did you know what algebra and the Backstreet Boys have in common?
Oh, what?
They both want you to tell me why. Get it? Because it's algebra. Oh, hey! Let's make some new math teachers now, shall we? I'm Martha. I'm a middle school teacher, and I have partnered with 240 to help teachers and soon-to-be teachers pass their certification exams. This video is going to prepare you for the Praxis Middle School Mathematics test. This video is going to cover 3 things: what's on the test and how to study for it, the most likely concepts that will be on the test, and we're going to look at a few practice questions. Whether you're looking to start a first, second, or even 5th career as an educator, stay tuned to learn the key concepts you need to know. Now, the middle school math exam consists of 4 areas called categories. There's number and quantity and algebra, functions and calculus, geometry, and statistics and probability. The first category we'll look at is number and quantity and algebra. This one will make up about 30% of your exam. Praxis breaks this category up into 2 subcategories for us. 1A is number and quantity, where you can expect to find questions about all the math basics. So, can you do basic math operations, use radicals, and just generally think critically about math topics? And 1B is algebra, where they'll ask you to solve and write equations and inequalities, and to do so in a bunch of different ways, like algebraically and graphically. Don't let your anxiety multiply. I know that this feels like a lot, but I'm gonna divide it into sections. We'll add to your confidence by subtracting from the unknown. Come on, you guys, can we round up on these laughs? We'll start with number and quantity. A big thing in this section is being able to correctly work with complex numbers. Need to brush up on those rules? Let me help you. First, remember that complex numbers contain both real and imaginary numbers. This means you'll see a variable, I, in your work. The lowercase I equals the square root of -1. Now, let's try a sample problem, similar to what you might see on your exam. Simplify the quantity of 6 plus 3i added to the quantity of 8 minus 4i. The real parts of both numbers can be combined. The imaginary parts of both numbers can be combined as well. And remember, we can treat it like any other variable. So 6 plus 8 equals 14, and 3i minus 4i equals -i. Since we can't combine terms any further, we're left with -i plus 14 as a final answer. Nice! How about we tackle that algebra piece? As you might have guessed, the biggest part of this section is solving for x. Let's try one of these problems together. Oh, wait, I have a better idea. The 240 study guide is packed full of instructional videos that walk you through all the math you need to know. Want a sneak peek? I thought so.
Solve for x in the equation 3 times the quantity of x minus 4 plus 10 equals 13. Start with simplification. Since x and 4 are not like terms, the parentheses cannot be simplified as the first step. Instead, multiply by applying the distributive property. Now we combine like terms, the -12 and the +10, to get -2. Now isolate x. First, add 2 to both sides. Then divide both sides by 3. This leaves us with x equals 5. Remember, according to the properties of equality, the 2 expressions remain equal to each other as long as you do the same thing to both sides. Last, check the solution in the original equation by using substitution. Make sure to use parentheses to avoid sign issues. Then simplify. Since both sides simplify to the same value, 13, the value of x we found is correct.
Good stuff, huh? There's a lot more where that came from in our study guide. But for now, let's keep working our way through your exam. We've already made it through the whole first category. Now we're moving on to functions and calculus, which will also make up about 30% of your test. And just like before, the test writer split this section up into 2 subsections: functions and calculus. However did they come up with these names? I guess we'll never know. The functions portion of the test covers what functions are, how to write them, and how to graph them. You'll also need to know how to use them to model relationships between quantities and how to identify specific types of functions. While the calculus portion asks you to take it up a notch. You'll need to know how to work with and identify function limits and derivatives, as well as how to analyze the behavior of a function. Is your brain starting to dysfunction with all this function talk? Don't worry, I can help you out. Let's start with the basics. What is a function, and how can you represent it? A function is a special type of relation where each input has only one output. For example, here are 3 relations. The x values are the inputs and the y values are the outputs. Let's look at set A first. This is a function because each number on the left is connected to only one number on the right. For set B, the number 2 on the left is connected to both 3 and 4 on the right, so set B is not a function. Finally, in set C, each number on the left points only to the number 2 on the right, so this is a function too. Functions can also be represented in lots of different ways. You may come across a function that is a set of ordered pairs, listed in a table, or in a mapping diagram, like the ones we just looked at. So many functions, so little time. Moving on to calculus. This section talks a lot about limits. A limit is the output value that a function approaches as the input approaches a given value. For example, the limit as x approaches 0 of x squared equals 0 means that as x approaches 0, the value of the function approaches 0. You'll need to know how to deal with all kinds of limits in lots of special circumstances. But for now, let's look at how to solve one using substitution. Find the limit as x approaches 2 of x squared minus 3x plus 5. We substitute 2 in for x and simplify. So the limit as x approaches 2 is 3. And if you still need a little help figuring out limits because we're just scratching the surface here, you should check out our study guide. We've got a ton of practice problems you can use to hone your skills. Man, we're cruising! 2 categories down, 2 to go. The geometry category makes up about 20% of your exam. Now, unlike the last few categories, the test graders didn't split this up any further, but we can still create a few subcategories to work with. We'll call the first category Properties of Lines and Shapes. This includes understanding the relationships of point, lines, and angles, as well as understanding concepts like congruence and similarity. And we'll call the second one Trigonometry. In this one, you'll need to do a lot with sine, cosine, and tangent, specifically applying them to triangles. Ready to see an example from the Properties of Lines and Shapes category? Let's talk line relationships. When we say line relationships, we mean whether lines are parallel, meaning they never intersect, or perpendicular, meaning they intersect at a 90-degree angle. And you can tell if lines are parallel or perpendicular by looking at their equation in slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. M is the value for slope. We've got it written out here for you already. Parallel lines have the same slope. Since both of these lines have a slope of 2, they're parallel. Perpendicular lines have slopes that are the opposite reciprocals of each other. Since one line has a slope of 2/3 and one has a slope of -3/2, they're perpendicular. Lines can also be neither parallel nor perpendicular, which just means they intersect at an angle that is not 90 degrees. Want to see an example of this in action? Let me show another clip from our study guide.
Complementary angles are 2 angles that have a sum of 90 degrees. Because of this, if given the measurement of one, you can solve for the other angle. If angle ABE and EBC are complementary, the 2 sum to 90 degrees. So if ABE is given as 52 degrees, angle EBC must be the difference between 90 and 52, which is 38. Supplementary angles are 2 angles that have a sum of 180 degrees. So if angle GHI and IHJ are supplementary, and we know that angle GHI is 128 degrees, we can take the total of 180 degrees minus 128 to get a measurement of 52 degrees for angle IHJ.
So helpful, right? There are so many more videos just like that one where we walk you through problems just like what you'll see on your exam. Now, let's look at the trig portion of this section. Remember how I said we'd be using sine, cosine, and tangent a lot? Here's a tip. If you're struggling to remember your trig functions, just imagine climbing the biggest mountain you can think of. No, hear me out. When you climb a super big mountain, your feet will hurt. What do you do when your feet hurt? You soak a toa. Okay, fine. But it is still a great mnemonic. If you don't like that one, you can remember some of her children are having trouble over algebra. Or she offered her cat a heaping teaspoon of apple juice. If it works for you, it works for us. All right, let's put this into action. If you're trying to figure out sine, you take the measure of the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. That's the so part. If you're trying to solve for cosine, you take the adjacent side divided by the hypotenuse. So C equals A over H is our ka. And if you're trying to solve for tangent, you want opposite over adjacent. So that's the toa. You may be laughing at me now, but I bet you'll remember it when it comes to test time. But to really get the confidence you deserve to pass the test, you need to get the 240 study guide. Only one category left. Statistics and probability is up next, and it makes up about 20% of your test. And as you may have guessed, we're going to split this into statistics and probability. In the statistics portion, you're going to need to know how to represent data in a graph or plot. You might be given a data set and asked which graph or plot would best be used to represent the data, or even asked to draw conclusions from a graph or plot you're given. Here's a list of common graphs and plots along with the type of data they best represent. If you're working with categorical data, choose a bar graph or pie chart. If you're working with quantitative data, you've got some more options. Line graphs track changes over time. Dot plots and stem and leaf plots are best with small data sets, and box plots and histograms are better with large data sets. Need a little help brushing up? Don't worry, we've got you. The 240 Study Guide has in-depth study material on these and so much more. We're on to the last concept for today, probability. A lot of this boils down to simple calculations of how likely it is that a given event is going to happen. And this really means taking the number of successful outcomes possible divided by the total number of outcomes possible. A simple event is when one experiment happens at a time with a single outcome. A compound event is when two or more simple events are performed together so that one event happens and so does another. Then, if you're working on compound event, you need to know whether the event is independent or dependent. Independent events do not impact each other, like rolling a die twice. No matter what the first roll is, the second roll still has the same probability. Dependent events do impact each other, like drawing two marbles from a bag. When the marble is drawn and not returned to the bag, it changes the probability for the second draw. And that's it. We've talked through all of the categories you'll come up against in this exam. But again, to really have the confidence you deserve, go subscribe to a 240 study guide. You can get the study guide for the Praxis Middle School Math exam. Let's look at some practice questions to show you how those concepts can appear on the test. If you want a lot of practice questions, you can click the free practice test below. At the end, you get a score report on how well you did on the test. And then you can subscribe to 240 and get all the practice questions you need to be 100% confident for the test. Now for questions. Remember, for numbers and quantity, I told you about how you'll need to work with complex numbers. Let's go there first. Remember that when adding complex numbers, treat the I like you treat variables when simplifying. Group like terms. So -8 plus 10 and 5i minus 4i. Combined, we're going to get 2 plus i. So this one is correct. One question down. How about an algebra question? If 1/5 x plus 3 equals 6, what is the value of x? To isolate x, we subtract 3 from both sides, then divide by 1/5. But wait, dividing by a fraction? Instead, you can multiply by the reciprocal, 5. The answer is B, 15. Next up is functions. Which of the following relations represent a function? Remember, in order for a number set to be a function, there can only be one output for every input. Or in other words, the x value can't repeat. So looking at choice A, there are 2 zeros in the x column, so it is not a function. In the next choice, each plotted point has a different x value, so it is a function. Then we move on and see that the input of -1 is connected to both 2 and 7. This means it is not a function. Finally, choice D has no repeating x values, so it is a function. So, choices A and C are not functions, but choices B and D are functions. Calculus is up next. Evaluate the limit as x approaches 5 for the quantity of x minus 5 squared. Evaluate limits algebraically by first substituting the limit into the expression. Replace x with 5, the number it is approaching, and evaluate. 5 minus 5 equals 0. 0 squared is still 0, so this is the right answer. Let's move on to geometry. Which of the following pairs of equations result in parallel lines when graphed? Remember, parallel lines have the same slope, and that slope is represented by m when the equation is in y equals mx plus b format, which all of these are. So now we just look for two equations that have the same m value. Oh, here it is in this choice. Both y equals negative 2x plus 1 and y equals negative 2x plus 4 have a slope of negative 2. This means they are parallel. SOHCAHTOA is up next. What is the measure of angle A? Since we're given the measure of the adjacent side, the side next to angle A, and the hypotenuse, we can do the ca part of SOHCAHTOA. The cosine of the angle is adjacent divided by hypotenuse, or 8 divided by 16, which simplifies to 1/2. The answer is 60 degrees because the cosine of 60 degrees is 1/2. So C is correct. We're getting so close. Only statistics and probability are left. Which type of graph or chart would be best used to show comparisons between the volume of water drunk by athletes competing in two different sports? Here, each sport is a category. Out of these choices, only pie charts and bar graphs show categorical data. Since pie charts are used for showing parts of a whole, that won't work for this data, so a bar graph is the best answer. Time to take it home with probability. 5 cards are randomly chosen without replacement from an ordinary deck of 26 black and 26 red cards. What expression shows the probability that all 5 cards are red? The first time we pull a card, we have a 26 out of 52 chance of it being red, so right away we can eliminate choices C and D. When we go to pull our second card, the number of red cards and total cards in the deck has decreased, so now we have a 25 out of 51 chance of pulling a red card. Choice A is correct. Each time a card is drawn, the probability changes. Now, that's just a small sliver of practice questions to give you an idea about how these concepts are assessed on the test. Congratulations on finishing the video. If you found it helpful, give it a like. If you really want to make sure you're prepared for the Praxis Middle School Math, take the next step and subscribe to the 240 Study Guide. It has hours of videos, so you can watch or listen along while doing chores. It's test-aligned, so you know precisely what you need to study. And it has hundreds of practice questions, so you can be sure you're ready. And it has the money-back guarantee. So, click the link below right now to get started. I will do algebra. I will do trigonometry. I'll even do statistics, but graphing is where I draw the line.